Hey there, so wanted to do a real quick breakdown of a project that I worked on recently, both for you to learn and maybe you to just get a feel for what like your average interview and B-roll project looks like when it's coming together. But it's also just something for me to reflect and to make sure that I am learning from what I'm working on. The one disclaimer I will make up front, I made this on assignment for an organization. This video that I'm making is not necessarily an endorsement politically or ethically of the things that are discussed in that video, and I want to keep this solely targeted on the video production aspects and just kind of the filmmaking craft that is behind this video. So for this production, my role was as director of photography and cinematographer, so I wasn't necessarily involved in the production aspect of finding the interviewee, getting the location, all that kind of stuff. So when the project came to me, it was determined that we were at one location, we were going to be at the subject's home, and we had about 3 hours to work with for this video. I knew that it was a PSA, that it was kind of like politically minded, that kind of thing, and I knew that those were our parameters, so we rolled up onto the location, we checked out the space, and very quickly it became apparent what we had to work with. So I knew that we probably wouldn't be able to shoot outside because it was windy, and you also just want to be sensitive, especially when somebody's in a downtown city area. You don't want to pull a lot of attention onto somebody by having cameras outside for like an hour and a half while you're filming an interview. So I knew we'd have to be inside. There were 2 rooms to work with, a kitchen and a living room space. The living room space had some windows in kind of inconvenient places, and there wasn't going to be a lot of depth. I was looking for the most depth that I could get out of an interview shot. So we ended up having to move into the kitchen. This angle that you see here, this is what I had to work with for the interview shot. Now, I don't love it. I'm not saying that this is the best interview shot ever, but I think that this was the best option given what we had to work with, since you get a little bit of depth in the frame by shooting through the doorway. There is some of the stuff on the table that I left there because I thought an empty table would have looked weirder, and there is the thermostat on the wall, there's a light switch, and then there's just a little peg on the wall as well. These are things that I could have removed in post, but I ended up just not having enough time in my schedule. My producers made it clear that that was not a big deal or priority for me to spend my time on removing those from every single shot. So that's basically the interview shot. This was a C200 A camera stationary and a C100 on a smaller tripod that I moved a little bit throughout the interview, but for the most part that was also stationary. It's all lit with a Godox SL60. And then I've got one of my Yongnuo YN362 tubes actually taped to the ceiling fan. Once we had wrapped up the interview, which I think it was probably about half an hour of setup, an hour and a half of interview, and then we moved into B-roll, where it was just get what we can around the house and get what we can outside. I did shoot a few shots inside, but only one of them ended up making it into the edit. I used more of the stuff that was happening outside. It was a gray, cloudy, rainy day, which actually that kind of just fit the moody, contemplative nature of the edit. And I ended up shooting everything in 60 frames per second so that I could slow it down in post, because when you're doing this kind of a shoot and you're kind of just making up B-roll on the fly, you want to be able to stretch that out to cover up the talking head shot, especially when the talking head shot is not super compelling to be watching the whole time. And so then we came into post, which actually happened a couple months after the shoot just because of the holidays and how we scheduled things in. And when we came into post, I ended up with a bunch of revisions. I pride myself on trying to get things done, even for internal clients who I know very well. 2, maybe 3 rounds of revisions. This one pushed 7 rounds of revisions, which means, and this is a takeaway that I'll talk about at the end as well, that my understanding and my producer's understanding, because I had a producer with me the entire time on set, our understanding of the project was not in line with what exactly the client and the internal stakeholders were looking for. I actually had to go back and re-record some scripted lines over Zoom with the interview subject. I didn't have time to travel all the way back to see him again to just re-record a few different lines. So what I had him do was, I was talking with him over Zoom, but I had him do a voice memo on his phone on the other side because I didn't want to deal with any dropouts from Zoom, really poor audio quality, and I was out in the middle of nowhere. I was like hotspotting off my phone to get on this call, and so I really wanted to make sure that we got a recording with no issues, and I just had him email me that recording, and with some EQ and some compression, you know, it doesn't sound too unlike the audio that we captured the day of on set through his lav mic. So 2 takeaways. One, if you are working on a video that is story focused, but is also more specifically a tool to impact policy, anything where the story is supporting more or less a greater thesis from your client or from whoever it is that you're working with, you absolutely want to have a pre-interview so that the client and the internal stakeholders can talk with the interview subject, that they can get a feel for what is this person's story and how does it line up with what we are trying to address in this video, and where might we need to fill in some gaps, or does this person's story even fit closely enough that it's worth having them be a part of this project. My other takeaway is don't be lazy with B-roll. See, we had about an hour at the end of the shoot before this person's time was up and we needed to get on a flight out of there, but I think we still wrapped like 30 minutes early. And that's because when we got to the B-roll, it was just kind of like, let's invent stuff, let's invent scenes. But when I got to the edit, it was like, wow, we really should have just spent that extra half an hour on set, gotten more footage. So whether that be just inventing scenes around the house or driving around with the subject saying, hey, are there any things that we talked about in this interview that we can go to one of these places within 30 minutes, I should have been using up all the time available to shoot as many scenes as possible, because that 30 minutes on set would have saved me plenty of time in having to go and look through stock footage or create motion graphics or whatever else, and it would have brought up the production value a whole lot because it would have looked a lot less like, oh, they shot an interview and walked around for a couple minutes outside, to more of, oh, they shot an interview and they walked around and, oh, we got to drive around to some interesting places. That kind of thing. You want to bring more production value in any way possible. That would have been an easy way to do it. I need to not be lazy and complacent on set. Those are the lessons. There you go. That's a lesson to me. Maybe it's a lesson to you. A little bit of behind the scenes. See you in the next one.
All right, Drew, do your magic.